What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today on the channel is a very special day. I'm finally going to talk about one of my favorite consoles of all time, the Sega Genesis. More specifically, the 1989 launch of the Sega Genesis. A lot of people don't realize that there was a Sega Genesis before Sonic the Hedgehog came out. And the disrespect in that is just off the charts because this system was a banger, and I'm going to talk about all 6 games that came out on the launch of the console in 1989. And that's what I want to talk about on today's episode, so roll that motherfucking intro. There is something that is just so nostalgic about remembering when a console hit the market back when I was a kid. Not only were you excited to see what the new hardware was capable of pulling off, but you were super excited to see what software was coming out with it, because that's what would make or break a system. If there was one thing I loved about the late 80s, it was the arcade scene. I was a huge fan of arcades, and I would play them any chance I got if I was lucky enough to get a quarter from my parents. Some of my favorite arcade games were ones like Super Hang-On, where I sat on the actual bike and tilted it left and right as I raced past the CPU on the screen, or Afterburner, while I sat inside the cockpit rotating violently every time I made the slightest move to the realistic control stick. But one thing I did notice with all these arcades is that they had the same bright blue logo blasted across each one: Sega. I had never heard of Sega before, and I had no clue that they were a bitter rival for Nintendo at the time. Being a kid who lived in the projects, I didn't have much exposure to any home consoles other than the NES. Growing up as a Nintendo kid, I had no idea about Sega or the Master System at the time. So I thought the NES was the pinnacle of video games. Little did I know that was all about to change, because in August 1989, Sega released what would go on to sell 30 million units and be its most successful console ever, the Sega Genesis.
And so it was, late in the 20th century, that a pox fell upon the land, a plague of home videos that were limited in intelligence. There was brain drain, and terminal boredom swept the countryside. The maker looked down and was not pleased by what he saw, and said, "This is not good." And so it was, he brought forth Genesis, a system with twice the power, twice the intelligence, twice the challenge, twice the fun. Only a chosen few were called forth to experience this new dimension of high-definition graphics and stereo sound. And the maker saw what he had done and said, "Now that's not bad. Discover Genesis, and your world will never be the same."
I remember getting issues of video game magazines talking about the early information trickling out from Japan about the new console from Sega. It was at that time I started to see the Genesis does what Nintendo advertisements in the magazines also. The visuals of the games coming out soon absolutely blew my little mind, followed by seeing the awesome commercials they had with actual real celebrities on them. People like James Buster Douglas and Michael Jackson in a video game totally blew me away at the time. Then finding out that the new console was going to be 16-bit, my hype meter was through the roof. When I started to see all the awesome arcade hits being developed for a home console, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that they were somehow putting these insane arcade graphics on a home console. It was a huge selling point for Sega, bringing the arcade experience home. And that's why I wanted one so bad. I remember seeing the commercials showing them side by side, comparing the arcade version to the Genesis version, and it looked almost identical when I was young. I couldn't see a difference. I was blinded by hypeness. Nowadays, it's easy to see the difference, but I was mesmerized by the new hardware and what it was capable of, and I hadn't even played it yet. So finally, in August 1989, I was finally able to get a taste of the next generation. This is my personal retrospective on the launch of the Sega Genesis and its 6 launch titles. I'm sure everybody's opinion will differ when it comes to these games, but this is just my opinion because I was around at the time and I actually played all these titles, so I hope you all enjoy. So let's start off with the pack-in title that was included with the Sega Genesis, Altered Beast. I hear a lot of people argue that this wasn't the best decision to pack this in with the Sega Genesis, which I beg to differ. This game was extremely popular in the arcades, so it was a no-brainer to bring something that had great music, really good graphics to help show everyone what the 16-bit Genesis was capable of. It was taking no prisoners. Not to mention, one of the biggest selling points of the game was that the co-op mode was included in the port, which also made this a perfect pack-in title. I think overall the game is fun. It's not the longest game, but it does have a pretty steep challenge to it, and it stays true to the arcade experience by offering great visuals, pretty solid controls. This was definitely a graphical achievement for the time. Playing this single player was fun, but playing it co-op was where it really shined and made it extremely enjoyable as a pack-in title for the Genesis. Just something about sitting beside your buddy, holding that curved boomerang Genesis controller, playing through this game, getting the power-ups, turning into the different animals to fight the stage bosses was just so enjoyable and really made for a fantastic experience at launch. Last Battle was a game that I first played at my dad's friend's house way back in 1989. My dad would go over there for some extracurricular activities, and I would just sit in the living room being bored, waiting for him to get done. But one time we went over there and he had a Sega Genesis with a game called Last Battle. Now this is a single player side-scrolling martial arts beat 'em up that for the time I had never seen before. Years later I would find out that this was actually based on a Japanese manga series called Fist of the North Star. But when they brought it to the US, they couldn't get the license, so they changed the character graphics and the names were altered and they renamed it Last Battle. When you first look at the game, it looks incredible. The sprites are all huge, and you would think that this was an arcade game. It was also the first time I had seen this unique graphic style called parallax scrolling on a home console. Since this game was actually Fist of the North Star in Japan, it was heavily edited when it came to the US. In the Japanese version, when you would hit somebody, their head would explode and blood would fly everywhere. But in this version, enemies just kind of bounce off of you when you hit them, which is ridiculous looking. But some of the boss battles, they still did bubble up and blow up when you beat them, which is kind of cool looking. You only have 3 forms of attack: punch, kick, and jump kick. You can also deflect projectiles if you time it correctly. As you play, you have a meter that fills up at the bottom of the screen. It's kind of like Altered Beast. You'll start changing with bigger muscles and stronger attacks. One huge downfall about the game is that it's brutally hard. The further you get, the harder it gets. But in this game, you only have 1 life and no continues. It's ridiculous. And there's no password or battery backup, which I think that was just a huge miscue bringing this to the home console without the ability to save your progress. Overall, it's one of the weaker titles in the launch lineup, but I do think it's worth a try even nowadays. Space Harrier 2 was a sequel to the highly successful Sega arcade shooter Space Harrier. It was developed and published by Sega. I remember playing the arcade back in the day all the time, and when I seen that it was getting released for the Genesis, I was so excited to bring the arcade experience home. You play as a superhero who runs and flies towards a forever distant background on a checkerboard style grid. Your main form of attack is a large laser cannon that shoots 4 shots at a time. But if your fingers get wore out, there is an option in the game's menus that lets you turn on auto fire, which helps greatly. The premise of the game is that you're flying around and you're shooting and dodging objects like pillars, trees, and these huge columns to try and make it through to the end of the stage. The game has 12 total stages each with a boss at the end. When I played the game, I thought it was actually pretty good, but to be honest, it didn't translate from the arcade very well. It lost a lot of the little things that really hurt the home port of the game. For one, the music isn't near as good. Plus, the arcade version was just overall more enjoyable. I do like that they had the digitized voice samples for the home version also, and that was really cool.
Get ready.
It's definitely one that I would have rented back in the day, but I would have never bought it. It just didn't hold up very well compared to the highly entertaining arcade version. The next game I played was at my buddy Matt's house. He was a huge baseball kid. He played in Little League, and most of the time when I was at his house, I would always have to leave early because he was always going to his Little League games. So when he got a game called Tommy Lasorda Baseball, I was excited to be able to play baseball without actually having to run and throw the ball in real life. For one, I sucked at it, and for two, I was lazy as hell. I just wanted to sit around and play video games all day. Seeing the commercial for this game really got me excited because it looked very good. Plus, like I said, a celebrity in a video game always just blew me away.
Baseball is my life. Gotta start Oz. Hot hitter.
Game time, Tommy.
I'm on my way. Hit away.
Bases loaded, Tommy. What do we do?
Bunt. Shift over. Dead pull hitter. Double play. What a game.
Game's over, Tommy.
Ain't over till it's over. Genesis by Sega. It's a whole new ball game.
The game consists of just a basic exhibition game or a 30-game season. One of the cool things about it is that it does have a password option to help you save your progress so you can come back and get your team to the World Series. Plus, with two-player action, made for an early fun baseball title. The 26 teams in the game use all real-life team names, but the statistics and the player names are fictional. I can see why Sega signed the deal with Tommy Lasorda, who had just won a World Series as a manager with the Los Angeles Dodgers at the time. One thing you can never debate was that Sega was the king of sports titles. They sold a crap ton of different sports titles during the Genesis era. I remember watching him play this game and thinking that it looked really good, and it was so realistic the way the ball moved on the field. I honestly don't think this title would have been very successful without the celebrity endorsement. Sega really knew how to get people excited for a sports title, and this was one of them that I think still holds up. If it would have had authentic player names, I think that would have been a top-notch title at launch. But it's still a solid game, and the first of many awesome sports titles that the Genesis would release over the next few years. Super Thunderblade is a game that I first played when my buddy Matt rented it when it was released. We remembered how awesome the arcade version was. It was called Thunderblade, so we figured Super Thunderblade had to be way better. Just like its predecessor, you take control of a helicopter in third-person perspective. The helicopter has guns and missiles, which you use to try to make your way through the game. When you're playing the game, a majority of the time it's viewed in the third-person perspective from behind the helicopter, similar to Space Harrier, but the camera changes to a top-down perspective when you fight the boss of each level. And there are 4 stages to beat in this game. Something about this title just didn't translate well from the arcade version. The arcade version has fantastic music, great visuals, and the scrolling is just way more smooth on it. The Genesis version is flawed severely, and I honestly feel that this title is probably the weakest of the 6 launch titles. It just didn't translate well at all. It's one of those games that you would rent one time, totally regret it, probably take it back early and never rent it again. And I hate to say that because the arcade version was so good and I really felt like they dropped the ball when they converted it to the Genesis. The last game I'm going to talk about today is a game that I first played at my grade school bully's house, believe it or not. This dude was a complete dick to me in school, but when he found me reading a video game magazine at recess, we instantly had something in common. We both wanted a Genesis, and he was the first one to get one. I walked over to his house after school that day. He popped in a game called Thunder Force 2, and the rest is history. Thunder Force 2 was a side-scrolling shooter developed by Technosoft. I know that some people will not agree with my opinion here, but I feel like this game is definitely the best Genesis launch title aside from the pack-in Altered Beast. Thunder Force 2 introduced a new weapon system that would become the staple for the rest of the series. You have a default arsenal of weapons which include the twin shot, the back shot, and the bomb shot in the top view stages. The default weapons can actually be upgraded to more powerful levels. Once you get them, they can be swapped between at the player's desire, but if your ship gets destroyed, all the weapons are lost except for the default weapons, just like in Gradius 3 for the Super Nintendo. You can control your ship called Elixia, and you travel to different stages to complete the game. When the game was released, it did get very good reviews, but as time passed and the sequels came out, it's now considered inferior to the best in the series, which is Thunder Force 3. I like this game a lot, and I still play it to this day. Colorful graphics, great music, and tight controls made this game a must-buy for any early Genesis adopter. Well, there you go. That's my personal retrospective look at the Sega Genesis launch of 1989. I love the Sega Genesis, and these 6 games right here honestly didn't do it justice. Just a few months later, they would get some really awesome bangers, like the Revenge of Shinobi, Forgotten Worlds, and Alien Storm that really made the Sega Genesis a powerhouse in the home video game market. I appreciate you guys watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you have any awesome memories of the Sega Genesis, make sure to leave a comment in the comment section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, keep on reminiscing, y'all. What's going on, y'all? I just want to take a short moment to talk about my buddy Sean. He sells vintage G.I. Joe and other vintage figures at the conventions around here, and I think you should get a hold of him if you're looking to buy some figures. All 100% complete, all authentic weapons, file cards, and figures. No reproduction stuff here. He's super affordable, insane quality, and I've been buying from him for years now, and I mean, I've gotten almost all my figures from him. So if you guys want to get a hold of him, he doesn't have any social media, reach out to me and I can get you in touch with him, because these things are only getting more and more expensive. So if you're wanting to build your awesome G.I. Joe collection, make sure you hit me up and I'll get you in touch. Take it easy, y'all.